The sound that jolted Ellis Boone from his restless sleep cut through the pre-dawn stillness like a blade. A woman's muffled sobbing, desperate and raw, drifting from his barn across the hard-pan Texas dirt. His calloused hand found the Colt .45 on his nightstand. Before his mind fully registered consciousness, 43 years of frontier survival, having burned such reflexes into his very bones. Ellis sat up in the narrow cot that served as his bed, his back protesting with the sharp ache that had plagued him since taking shrapnel at Gettysburg 20 years prior. The sparse room held little more than essentials: a wash basin, a few books, and a daguerreotype of his deceased wife Clara that he'd long since stopped looking at directly. The crying came again, softer now, but unmistakably human, carried on the hot wind that never seemed to cease in this godforsaken stretch of country. He pulled on his worn boots and stepped into the suffocating heat of the Texas morning. July 1871 had brought no relief from the drought that had turned his modest ranch into a monument to stubborn persistence. The barn loomed ahead, its weathered planks silvered by moonlight, and Ellis approached with the careful gait of a man who'd learned that survival often depended on assuming the worst. The barn door hung slightly ajar, creaking on rusted hinges. Ellis pushed it open with his rifle barrel, squinting into the darkness above. The sobbing stopped abruptly, replaced by the frantic rustling of someone or several someones trying to hide in the hayloft. "I've got a rifle pointed up there." Ellis called out his voice, carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Come down slow and keep your hands where I can see them." Silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Then a woman's voice speaking halting English. "Please, mister. We already hurt bad. Don't hurt us more." Ellis climbed the ladder, each rung groaning under his weight. What he found in the hayloft made him lower his weapon in shock. 5 Apache women huddled together in the straw, their bodies bearing fresh evidence of violence. Their feet were torn and bloody from running barefoot across miles of rocky terrain, their traditional clothing shredded and stained with blood and dirt. The youngest appeared no older than 16, her dark eyes wide with terror as she pressed herself against the hay bales. The eldest, perhaps in her mid-20s, watched Ellis with the calculating wariness of a cornered wolf. All bore the marks of a desperate flight, thorns embedded in their hair, scratches covering their arms, lips cracked from dehydration. "Jesus Christ," Ellis whispered, setting his rifle aside. He pulled the water canteen from his belt and held it out. "Here, drink slow." The eldest woman took the canteen with trembling hands. She was tall and proud despite her injuries, with intelligent eyes that seemed to take his measure even as she drank. When she passed the water to the others, Ellis noticed something glinting around the neck of one of the younger women, a tarnished silver locket that caught the pale light filtering through the barn's gaps. The locket stirred something in Ellis's memory, though he couldn't place what. It was small and delicate, with intricate engravings that seemed familiar. He found himself staring at it, a peculiar unease settling in his chest. "My name is Tala," the eldest woman said, her English careful but clear. "We run from bad white men, sheriff men. They hunt us like animals since yesterday's sunset." What sheriff men? Ellis asked, though he already suspected. In this corner of Texas, only one lawman had the resources and inclination to hunt Apache with such determination. The fat one with the star. Tala replied, her voice heavy with exhaustion and fear. "He call himself Pope. He bring many men with guns. They come for her." She gestured toward the young woman wearing the locket, a girl with distinctive tattoo marks on her forearms that seemed to tell a story Ellis couldn't decipher. Before Ellis could respond, a rifle shot cracked through the morning air. The bullet punched through the barn wall, sending splinters flying inches from his head. The women screamed, and Ellis threw himself over them, pushing them deeper into the hay. "Stay down," he shouted, grabbing his rifle. through a gap in the boards, and he could see riders silhouetted against the dawn sky, 6 men on horseback positioned along the ridge overlooking his property. Ellis recognized the lead rider's distinctive wide-brimmed hat and the way he sat his horse with arrogant ease. Sheriff Arliss Pope, a man who'd built his reputation on what he called keeping the peace, through methods that often stretched the boundaries of law. Ellis fired back his shot, kicking up dust near the horse's hooves. The riders pulled back beyond the ridge, but he knew they wouldn't retreat far. Pope was as persistent as a rattlesnake and considerably more venomous. Those men. Tala said, her voice urgent and low. They attack our village at Crow's Bluff 2 nights past. They kill our families, old men, women, children. They make it look like raid from another tribe, but we know truth. They come for her specifically. She indicated the young woman with the locket, who had been staring at Ellis with an expression of curious recognition. Why her, Ellis asked, though he kept his eyes fixed on the ridge. Tala hesitated, then seemed to decide that honesty was their only hope. Her name is Marala. She was born to white family, but Apache raised her from baby. There is big reward for her return to white family. Very big reward that grow bigger every year. Ellis felt ice form in his veins. How long ago was she taken? 15 summers. Maybe 16. She was very small baby when the raid happened. The white family, they were killed all except her. The men who did it, they keep her alive because they know someday the reward will be worth more than her death. The pieces began clicking together in Ellis's mind with horrible clarity. 15 years ago, Apache raids had been common in this region. His own family had been victims of one such attack while he'd been away serving with the Union Army. He'd returned to find his homestead burned, his wife Clara dead, and his infant daughter missing, presumed killed. The family that was killed. Ellis said slowly, "Where did this happen?" "North of here. Place called Willow Creek, small farm near the river bend." Ellis's blood turned to ice water. Willow Creek was where he'd built his first home, where Clara had died. The description matched his own tragic history with terrifying precision. "This girl," he said, looking at Marala more carefully. "You said she was a baby when she was taken." "Yes, maybe 6 months old. She had locket around her neck when they found her. Apache woman who raised her, she keep it always. Said it was only thing left from her first family." Ellis stared at the locket around Marala's neck, his heart hammering against his ribs. It was similar to one he'd given Clara before leaving for the war, a delicate silver piece with their initials engraved inside. But thousands of such lockets existed. It had to be coincidence. "Can I see the locket?" he asked. Marala looked questioningly at Tala, who nodded. The young woman removed the chain and handed it to Ellis with careful reverence. His hands shook as he opened it, revealing a faded photograph of a baby and an inscription that made his world tilt on its axis. "To our beloved daughter from Eby and Clara, Ellis Boone and Clara Boone." The locket he'd given his wife, containing a photograph of their daughter. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. "Apache woman who raised me," Marala said in halting English. "She say it was with me when first family die." Ellis closed the locket carefully, his mind reeling. Either this was an impossible coincidence, or the young woman sitting before him was his daughter, the child he'd grieved for 15 years. The thought was too enormous to process, too painful to hope for. "We need to get you out of here," he said, forcing himself to focus on immediate survival. "Those men will be back with more riders." But even as he spoke, Ellis knew escape was impossible. The women were too injured to travel far, and Pope's men would track them down within hours. The decision crystallized in his mind with the weight of moral certainty. He'd failed to protect his family 15 years ago. He wouldn't fail again. "You're staying," he said firmly. I'm going to hide you better, and you're going to stay quiet no matter what happens. Tala's eyes widened. You help us, but we are Apache. Your people, they hate us. Ellis looked at each of the women in turn, seeing in their faces the same desperation he'd felt when he'd returned from the war to find his world destroyed. You're not Apache or white or anything else right now. You're just people in trouble. And helping people in trouble is what decent folks do. The morning sun climbed higher, turning the barn into a furnace. Ellis moved the women to the deepest corner of the loft, behind bales of hay, arranged to look undisturbed. He cleaned their wounds with water and strips torn from his spare shirt, noting that the youngest woman was running a fever from an infected cut on her leg. She needs a doctor, he told Tala quietly. No doctor will help Apache, Tala replied. Doc Carver will. He's an old war buddy of mine. Decent man. Ellis paused, studying the young woman's flushed face. But I can't leave you here unprotected while I go to town. The thundering of hooves announced Pope's return before noon. Ellis stepped out of his house to meet them, his rifle held ready, but not immediately threatening. The heat was oppressive, the kind that made men's tempers run short and their patience thin. Sheriff Ellis Pope was a big man, gone soft around the middle, his badge gleaming against a sweat-stained vest. His pale eyes held the cold calculation of a predator, and his mouth was set in the thin line of a man accustomed to getting his way through intimidation. Behind him rode 5 men, Ellis recognized as the worst kind of frontier, scum bounty hunters, claim jumpers, and general troublemakers who'd found profit in Pope's methods. Ellis Boone, Pope said, his voice carrying false joviality. Beautiful morning, isn't it? Though I hear you might have had some uninvited guests pass through here recently. Haven't seen anybody, Ellis replied, keeping his voice steady. Been sleeping late. Age catches up with a man. Pope's smile was all teeth and no warmth. 5 Apache women on foot heading east from Crow's Bluff. They're considered dangerous fugitives, and anyone harboring them would be considered an accessory to murder. Murder? Ellis asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Killed 3 settlers yesterday. Pope lied smoothly. Butchered them in cold blood. We've got a legal obligation to bring them in dead or alive. Ellis knew it was a lie, could see it in Pope's eyes and hear it in his voice, but confronting the sheriff directly would only confirm his suspicions about the women's presence. Like I said, I haven't seen anybody. One of Pope's men, a scarred brute named Crenshaw, spat tobacco juice into the dust. Sheriff, this old soldier's got secrets written all over his face. Why don't we just search the place proper? Pope held up a hand. Now. Ellis here is a respected member of our community. War hero lost his family to Apache raids. He wouldn't help the very people who killed his wife and child. Pope's eyes glittered with malice. Would you, Ellis? The words hit Ellis like a physical blow, but he forced his expression to remain neutral. I told you I haven't seen anybody. Of course you haven't, Pope said, dismounting with deliberate slowness. But you won't mind if we take a look around, will you? Just to be thorough. Ellis couldn't refuse without confirming Pope's suspicions. He nodded curtly and stepped aside, his heart pounding as the men began searching his property. They went through his house first, overturning furniture and dumping drawers with the casual destructiveness of men who enjoyed having power over others. Then they moved to the barn. Ellis forced himself to remain calm as Pope and his men climbed into the loft. He could hear them moving around above their boots, creaking on the wooden floor. The sound of hay bales being shifted made his blood run cold. Lot of hay up here, Crenshaw called down. Good place to hide something, or someone. Indeed it is, Pope agreed. Search every corner. Thinking quickly, Ellis walked to the corral and opened the gate. His dozen head of cattle, already agitated by the heat and the presence of strangers, began to mill about nervously. Ellis slapped the rump of the lead bull, a cantankerous animal named Samson, who'd never liked crowds. Samson bellowed and charged toward the barn, the rest of the herd following. The thundering of hooves and the lowing of frightened cattle filled the air, creating exactly the distraction Ellis needed. "What the hell?" Pope's voice came from above, followed by the sound of men scrambling to avoid being trampled. "Cattle got spooked," Ellis called up innocently. "Better get them settled before they hurt somebody." It took the better part of an hour to get the animals corralled again, by which time the sun was directly overhead, and the heat was becoming unbearable. Pope's men were sweating profusely, their tempers frayed by the heat and the wild cattle. "We'll be back," Pope promised as he mounted his horse. Next time with more men and less patience. As the posse rode away, Ellis waited until they were completely out of sight before returning to the barn. His shirt was soaked with sweat, and his hands trembled slightly as he climbed to the loft. "They're gone," he whispered, "for now." The women emerged from their hiding place like ghosts, and their faces pale with exhaustion and fear. The youngest woman was clearly worse, her fever climbing despite Ellis's efforts to cool her with wet cloths. "She's dying," Tala said bluntly. "She needs medicine, real medicine." Ellis made his decision. "I'm going to town for the doctor. Doc Carver fought with me in the war. He's a good man. He'll help." "It's too dangerous," Tala protested. "They'll be watching for you." "Maybe. But she'll die for certain if I don't try." Ellis looked at each of the women in turn, noting their injuries and exhaustion. "While I'm gone, you rest. Drink of water. Eat." He pulled out a small bag of jerky and hardtack from his supplies. "And if anyone comes, you hide, and you don't make a sound." The ride to town took Ellis through rolling hills baked brown by the relentless sun. He kept to the back trails, but the feeling of being watched never left him. Pope's men were out there somewhere, waiting for him to make a mistake. Redemption wasn't much of a town, a single dirt street lined with weathered buildings that seemed to lean on each other for support. The general store, saloon, church, and doctor's office comprised the bulk of civilization in this part of Texas. Ellis tied his horse behind the general store and made his way through the back alleys to Doc Carver's office. Samuel Carver was a thin man with gentle eyes and steady hands, the kind of person who'd seen too much suffering to be shocked by much of anything. His small office sat above the barber shop, and Ellis climbed the narrow stairs with his heart in his throat. Ellis Carver looked up from his medical journal, his weathered face creasing with concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I need your help, Sam, and I need you to not ask questions." Carver studied him for a long moment, taking in the tension in Ellis's shoulders and the worry lines around his eyes. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough. There's a young woman dying of fever, infected wound. She needs medicine and care." "Where is she?" "Better you don't know until we get there." Carver nodded slowly. "Give me 5 minutes to get my bag." They were heading for the back door when it burst open. Pope stood in the doorway, his gun drawn with Crenshaw and 2 other men behind him. The sheriff's face was flushed with heat and anger, his eyes holding the dangerous gleam of a man who'd been pushed too far. "Well, well," Pope said, his voice dripping with false cheer. "Ellis Boone and the good doctor, planning a house call. Just needed some medicine." Ellis said, his hand moving slowly toward his gun. "Nothing that concerns you." "Oh, but it does concern me," Pope said, stepping into the room. "You see, I've been thinking about our conversation earlier, and I keep coming back to the same conclusion: you're lying through your teeth." "I don't know what you mean." Pope's fist caught Ellis in the stomach, doubling him over. The blow sent fire through his middle-aged body, reminding him that he wasn't the young soldier he'd once been. "I mean, you're hiding those Apache bitches somewhere," Pope snarled. "And you're going to tell me where?" Ellis straightened up, tasting blood. "Go to hell." What followed was a methodical beating. Pope and his men took turns using fists and boots and the butt of a rifle. Ellis fought back as best he could, but 3 against 1 were impossible odds for a man of 43. His war injury screamed in protest as blow after blow landed on his already aching body. Last chance, Pope said, breathing heavily. Tell me where they are, or I'll burn down every building in this county until I find them. Ellis spat blood onto the floor. I told you, I haven't seen anybody. Pope drew his gun, pressing the barrel against Ellis's forehead. Maybe I should just end this now. You won't. Ellis said, his voice steady despite the pain. Because you need me to lead you to them. And you know I'll die before I tell you anything. Pope's finger tightened on the trigger, then relaxed. You're right. But there are other ways to make a man talk. He turned to his men. Burn down his house. Maybe that'll loosen his tongue. As the men headed for the door, Ellis saw his chance. A fire poker from the office's small stove lay within reach. He grabbed it and swung with all his remaining strength, catching Crenshaw across the temple. The man dropped like a stone, blood streaming from his head. In the chaos that followed, Ellis fought his way to the back door. Pope's shots followed him into the alley, bullets chipping brick from the walls as he ran. He reached his horse and spurred it into a gallop, racing back toward his ranch, with Pope's curses ringing in his ears. The storm that had been building all day finally broke as Ellis reached home. Great sheets of rain swept across the plains, turning the dust into mud and the heat into humidity. He found Doc Carver waiting in the barn, having followed by a different route. They're in the loft, Ellis said, helping the doctor climb the ladder. His body protested every movement, the beating having awakened every old injury from the war. Carver worked quickly and efficiently, cleaning the infected wound and administering medicine from his bag. The young woman's fever broke within an hour, and she opened her eyes for the first time since Ellis had found them. She'll live, Carver said, packing his supplies, but she needs rest and proper food. Thank you, Sam. Don't thank me yet. Pope's not finished with you. As if summoned by his words, the sound of approaching horses cut through the storm. Ellis looked out through a gap in the barn wall and saw torches bobbing in the darkness. Pope and his men riding hard through the rain. They're back, he said, and they've brought more friends. This time, Pope wasn't interested in talking. The first torch sailed through the air and landed in the hay flames, spreading quickly, despite the dampness from the rain. More torches followed, and soon the entire barn was ablaze. Out, Ellis shouted. Everybody out. The women climbed down from the loft, and their faces grim with determination. They'd spent the day talking among themselves, and Ellis could see that something had changed in them. They were no longer just victims, they were survivors, and they were angry. Ellis led them through the small window at the back of the barn, dropping into the muddy corral. The rain poured down in sheets, turning the ground into a quagmire. Behind them, the barn burned like a signal, fire flames leaping high into the stormy sky. They're there. Crenshaw's voice cut through the storm. They're in the corral. Gunfire erupted from the darkness. Ellis returned fire, his shots answered by muzzle flashes from the shadows. The women scattered, some taking cover behind the water trough, others grabbing whatever weapons they could find. Tala seized a broken fence post, wielding it like a club. Marala grabbed a sharp piece of metal that had blown off the barn roof. The youngest woman, still weak from fever, crouched behind the water trough with a heavy stone in each hand. Through the rain and smoke, Ellis saw Pope approaching, his gun drawn. The sheriff's face was a mask of rage and determination, his clothes soaked and his hair plastered to his head. This ends now, Boone, Pope shouted over the storm. Ellis stepped out from behind the corral fence, his gun steady despite the pain in his body. You're right, it does. They fired simultaneously, the reports of their guns lost in a crack of thunder. Pope's shot went wide, thrown off by the rain and his own anger. Ellis's bullet took the sheriff in the shoulder, spinning him around. Pope stumbled, but didn't fall, raising his gun for another shot. Ellis dove to the side as Pope's second shot split the air where his head had been. He rolled in the mud, coming up with his gun trained on Pope's chest. Give up, Ellis said. It's over. Pope laughed, a bitter sound that mixed with a howling wind. You think you know what this is about? You think you understand what's at stake here. I understand that you're a murderer and a thief. I'm a businessman, Pope snarled. That girl you're protecting, do you know who she really is? Do you know what family she belongs to? Ellis felt his blood turn to ice. What are you talking about? Look at that locket she wears, you fool. Really look at it. Read the inscription. Despite himself, Ellis glanced toward Marala, who was crouched behind the water trough with the others. The locket caught the firelight, and suddenly Ellis remembered opening it, reading the inscription in his own barn just hours earlier. To our beloved daughter from Ebe and Clara. Pope quoted his voice, full of malicious satisfaction. Ellis Boone and Clara Boone. Your own initials, your own wife's name. The words hit Ellis like a physical blow. His gun wavered, and in that moment of shock, Pope fired again. The bullet caught Ellis in the thigh, sending him sprawling in the mud. That's right, Pope said, advancing with his gun raised. The girl you've been protecting is your own daughter. The baby you thought died in that raid 15 years ago. Ellis struggled to his feet, his legs screaming in pain. You're lying. We orchestrated that raid, Ellis. Me and a few other enterprising men. We knew there was a standing reward for missing children, and we knew it would grow over time. So we hired some renegade Apache to attack your farm, kill your wife, and take the baby. Then we killed the Apache to tie up loose ends. Rage flooded through Ellis, hot and consuming. You murdered my wife. Business is business, Pope said with a shrug. We kept the girl alive, had her raised by friendly Apache, and waited for the reward to grow big enough to make it worthwhile. 15 years of patience, and now it's time to collect. Ellis raised his gun, but Pope was faster. The sheriff's third shot took Ellis in the chest, and he fell backward into the mud, his vision blurring. As darkness closed in around him, Ellis heard the sounds of battle continuing. The women were fighting back with desperate courage, using their improvised weapons to defend themselves. He could hear Tala's voice calling out in Apache, strong and defiant. Then through the rain and smoke, Ellis heard something that made his heart leap, the sound of approaching horses. Townspeople drawn by the fire and the sound of gunfire were arriving to investigate. What's happening here? A voice called out. Ellis recognized it as Reverend Matthews, the town preacher. Apache raiders. Pope called back, his voice strained from his wounds. They attacked the Boone ranch. Ellis is dead and they're trying to escape. That's a lie. Tala's voice rang out clearly. This man is killer. He murdered Ellis's family long ago, and now he tried to kill us. Ellis struggled to sit up, his chest burning with each breath. She's telling the truth, he managed to say. More horses arrived, and Ellis could hear confused voices as the townspeople tried to make sense of the chaotic scene. Through the rain and firelight, he saw Marala approaching the locket clutched in her hand. Father, she said, the word coming out hesitantly in English. Ellis looked at her, really looked, and saw it all. The shape of her face was Clara's, but the stubborn set of her jaw was his own. Her eyes held the same steady intelligence he'd seen in his wife, combined with the determination that had gotten him through the war. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you. You did protect me, she said, kneeling beside him in the mud. You protect all of us. Pope was trying to reload his gun, but his wounded shoulder made his movements clumsy. Reverend Matthews stepped forward, his own rifle trained on the sheriff. Arliss Pope. The preacher said, his voice heavy with authority. You're under arrest for murder and conspiracy. You can't prove anything, Pope snarled. We can prove enough, Doc Carver said, stepping out of the crowd of townspeople. I heard your confession, and I'm sure these women can tell us more. As the townspeople took Pope and his surviving men into custody, Ellis felt his strength ebbing. The bullet in his chest had done serious damage, and he knew he was dying. But for the first time in 15 years, he felt at peace. "The locket," he whispered to Marala. "Let me see it one more time." She opened it with trembling fingers, and Ellis saw the inscription clearly. His own initials, E.B., and Clara's name, etched in the silver by his own hand so many years ago. Below it, in Clara's careful script, were the words he'd forgotten, "Our little star." "I remember now," Marala said softly. "I remember the name. Clara. She sang to me." Ellis smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire or the fever. "She sang to you every night. Lullabies and hymns. She said you were our little star because you were born under the brightest star in the sky." "Tell me more," Marala said. "About her, about home." Ellis felt his vision growing dim, but he forced himself to speak. "She was beautiful, kind. She would have loved the woman you became. Strong and brave, just like her. And she would have been so proud of how you survived, how you protected the others." The rain was stopping, and the first pale light of dawn was breaking through the clouds. Ellis could hear the townspeople organizing themselves, making plans to take Pope back to town for trial, to care for the wounded women, to rebuild what had been destroyed. "Will you stay here?" Ellis asked. "Will you help them make things right?" Marala looked at the other women, then back at him. "We stay, we help, we remember." Ellis closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 15 years of guilt finally lifting from his shoulders. He'd failed to protect his family once, but he'd succeeded when it mattered most. The circle was complete. "Tell her," he whispered. "Tell Clara I kept my promise. I found our little star." Ellis Boone died as the sun rose over the Texas plains, his daughter's hand. In his surrounded by the people he'd died protecting. His last words were a prayer of gratitude, carried on the wind to wherever Clara waited for him. The trials that followed exposed the full extent of Pope's corruption. The townspeople, shocked by the revelation of how deeply the rot had spread, banded together to make amends. A fund was established to help the Apache survivors, and new laws were passed to prevent such atrocities from happening again. Marala chose to stay in redemption, using her unique position as a bridge between two cultures to help heal the wounds that had festered for too long. Tala and the other women stayed as well, finding acceptance in a community that had been forced to confront its own failures. The locket remained with Marala, a reminder of the love that had survived 15 years of separation and pain. In the evenings, when the day's work was done, and the sun was setting over the rebuilt ranch, she would open it and remember the lullabies, the warm embrace the father who had died to save her. The frontier was still hard, still dangerous, but it was no longer lawless. In the ashes of the old barn, in the memory of a good man's sacrifice, something new had been born, a community that chose justice over convenience, mercy over hatred, hope over despair. And in the end, that was Ellis Boone's true legacy. Not the buildings he'd built or the land he'd claimed, but the change he'd brought to the hearts of those who came after. The locket had revealed more than just a family secret. It had revealed the truth that love once given never truly dies.